Good afternoon. Welcome to Optimal Care Pediatrics, located in St. Lucie West. I'm Dr. Monique Mondesi, a general pediatrician. This afternoon, we're going to be discussing bullying, and I have a wonderful panel with me, and they'll introduce themselves. Please feel free to write questions or comments as we go through the discussion. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Lois McGuire. I am a retired superintendent of schools from New Jersey, now living in Palm City, Florida. I am the author of Don't Be That Kid at School. Don't Be That Kid at School is a character value education book. Each scene depicts a different character trait: honesty, respecting others' space, loyalty, self-reflection. You can find Don't Be That Kid at School at Amazon or barnesandnoble.com.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Laura Levos. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist here in St. Lucie County and also the owner of the Olive Tree Center for Child and Family Psychology. I'm grateful to be here today, so thank you ladies for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining us today. All right, so our first question is define what is bullying. Either of you.
Well, according to the CDC, bullying is a multifaceted definition, but essentially the basics of it are that it is an unwanted aggressive act that's perpetrated by a peer or a group of peers, and often it has a higher risk of repeating itself and being a repetitive behavior. And so that's what bullying is a definition of in my book.
Yeah, I think the critical word that was just said is repeated. Mm-hmm. Because everyone goes through periods of time when someone may say something that upsets us. Right. It's the fact that it is repetitive. It is the fact that it's cruel. It's saying something cruel to someone. It is hitting someone repeatedly all the time. You are afraid. That is bullying.
Thank you. And what is the bully victim?
Typically, I've defined it as a child or vulnerable person that is being perpetrated against by the aggressor and having those unwanted acts perpetrated against them repeatedly. And they are at higher risk for developing various different issues as well. So they are that vulnerable child, I think, too, in the classroom settings, in our neighborhoods. And that's what I've conceptualized.
Now, as an educator, what I found was your typical, and I'll put in quotes, victim is someone who has a little more difficulty fitting in with others. Mm-hmm. They may be a loner. They may be someone who is more interested in other things than your typical things that children like to do. And they have difficulty expressing themselves. Absolutely. That's what I found.
Also, children that have minority populations or disabilities are also at greater risk of being targeted.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned recurrence, that the event has to recur. Well, how many times does it have to occur for it to be considered bullying?
I kind of did some digging on this because I think that there is a fine line between that isolated incident you were talking about and then the repetitive behavior. But what we found is if that one incident has a likelihood of repeating itself, it is categorized as a bullying act. So it can only occur once and still in my eyes, I think still be categorized as a bullying exchange.
I think you're 100% right. It depends on the degree of it.
Absolutely.
And what is happening, and also how it personally affects your child. Mm-hmm. Some children have an easier time dealing with adversity, let's say.
Resiliency.
And others don't. So it depends on the severity of what is happening to the child. And you have to really look at each individual case for what it is.
Absolutely.
It's not it's not broad.
Black and white.
It really isn't. It's not broad.
Okay, thank you. And what is the difference between bullying and conflict? That's a tough one, right?
Yeah. Well, kids have conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
It's in their nature. They are going to have spats. They are even going to touch each other and, push each other, and it's normal. And I really don't think that parents should get involved until it becomes necessary for you to get involved, because most of the times kids will handle it themselves. And they have to learn how to do that, because they're going to need to do that as they become adults anyway. The difference is meanness. There are some kids who have a tendency to be meaner than other kids.
Like that aggression quality,
Yes.
I think.
Yeah,
There's a difference between, I think, disagreeing and having that argumentative quality of the
Absolutely.
conflict, and then unwanted precipitated aggression. That's also that likelihood of repeating itself.
there's a line that gets crossed. When your child understands that he or she had an argument with their, I'll put in quotes, best friend,
Right.
it's going to happen,
Yes.
or they're going to say something unkind to each other, and your child is afraid. And hopefully you have the type of relationship with your child that he or she will be able to come to you and express that to you. That's when the line's been crossed. That's the difference.
So if the child is fearful,
Absolutely.
then that falls into the category.
You'll see a
of bullying.
change in your child when that happens.
I also think that bullying comprises this power dynamic and the power differential. And so I think there's a difference between having an argument with this equal plane of a certain disagreement, and then that power differential with the aggressor and being perpetrated against with some kind of unwanted
Yes, for sure.
exchange.
And that leads to the next question. What is cyberbullying versus in-person bullying? What is the difference between the two?
Well, I think, certainly it is so much easier for any child to put something on the internet or to send you an email that can be aggressive, that can be cruel, versus face to face. It's just easier to do. So we're finding a tremendous increase in cyberbullying because of the nature of it. And your child can shut off their computer and not listen to it, which is so much easier. And so the main difference is I find person to person is much more aggressive. It's just much more aggressive.
So who's likely to be cyberbullying? Which groups or gender would be more likely to be a cyberbully?
I think girls.
Yes,
Not
so
much of
that.
females tend to have they're more insidious in their verbal bullying. Males are more externalizing, and females are more internalizing, just based on some of the research that we see. So electronic mediums of being able to bully tend to be a little more favorable in the verbal arena of things.
And how should a child respond to cyberbullying?
Well, I just want to go back for a second, and I think that parents need to be vigilant with their child's computer, with their phone, and I don't want you to be a snoop. You have to give your child some privacy, but on the other hand, you have to know the signs of when something might be happening to your child through the computer, through their phone, and be able to take care of it if they're not able to do it themselves. I think that's an important
Absolutely.
thing to express to parents out there.
Monitoring software is, I think, sometimes very essential, especially with the accessibility to content nowadays online. And so I think, too, a preventative measure there would be monitoring software, ensuring that there is openness with their devices and histories, with, as a parent, being able to make sure that you are aware of what they're looking at, what they're receiving.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and block the person.
Right.
I mean, it's funny. Shut the person off. Just block them.
Mhm.
And why would you accept day after day of receiving this? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Mhm.
You have the power to stop things.
Mhm.
And I think with that, we can empower our children to understand that. And if it is personal one-on-one, I always said to children, why are you standing there and accepting this?
Mhm.
Walk away.
Should
Find
they,
a place.
should they respond to a mean text message or Facebook post or
I
picture?
think it depends on who is doing it if all of a sudden the girl who you thought was your best and closest friend writes something mean to you. I have no problem with you responding and saying, "You've just hurt my feelings.
Mhm.
I'd like to talk to you about this when we get to school tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Or I'd like to call you later on tonight and talk to you about it." This is someone who you think is your friend. But if a stranger, someone who you've never spoken to at school, you know that he or she is in the school, responds to you, I would not respond back to that person. You don't know that person. You don't know what they're capable of. It's different. You have to assess it, and you can teach your children how to do that. You can role play with your children to teach them how to do that, for sure.
I think that the foundation is also modeling those good communication skills to your children, even in a conflict with family members. It really does start at home. It starts with being able to model good communication skills, assertiveness skills, being able to practice our I versus you statements. That's also a very powerful technique. And
Can you give us an example?
Sure. So what we know from the research in terms of good communication is typically people are more receptive to listening to you about what you're trying to express to them when you start out with the word I versus you. If I say I feel upset or angry or frustrated that you are saying these things to me, the receiver may be a little more receptive to the message than if you start out with the word you. So if I'm saying you need to back off, you are being aggressive, then essentially it's more of a defense mechanism that's triggered, and that person may actually become more increasingly escalated because it's more attacking in nature to say and start off with you. And that's a universal principle of communication that's really effective, whether it's with bullies, whether it's with parents and children, and it's a nice little tool to have.
They're called iMessages.
Yes.
That is what it's called.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I'm not trying to do an ad here, but I wrote a resource guide
Yes.
filled with activities that go with Don't Be That Kid at School. And I have iMessages in the resource guide for engaged parents and teachers. It is a skill that you can teach your child,
Mm-hmm.
and it's easy to teach them. You start right from the beginning when they're young, and you start teaching them I messages. I feel blank when
you.
blank.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple.
Mm-hmm.
So we will post a link to the resource guide and to Lois's books on my Facebook page, as well as on the Optimal Care webpage after the talk. So moving on. So if you suspect your child is either being the cyberbully or is cyberbullied, should you take the phone away?
In my humble opinion, I don't think that is the automatic first line of intervention. I think first empowering your child to be able to practice conflict resolution, being able to feel empowered to get some skills to address the bullying exchange first, and skill building. I think that if we go into that mama bear protective mode, which I think is very instinctual and normal, then you're not skill building and giving that child the empowerment, the resources to address some of the aggression that they're experiencing. And that takes help. And I think that also takes, like you said, that rehearsal of the what if scenarios with the parent, with peers. But I don't think it should be the very first line of intervention in addressing a cyberbullying issue.
Because that is, for most children, their lifeline.
Absolutely.
That's their main method.
And we could go on a whole nother
Yes.
segment on screen time.
Oh, yeah. We've done that talk.
Yeah.
This social media talk. Next question, how common is bullying? So percentages and how many kids in school are being bullied, and what age groups do we see bullying occurring in?
All age groups. All age groups. You'll find aggressive young children in preschool. You will see it. And it's really the time to teach children the skills so that they're kind and that they're thoughtful and that they have the ability to do some self-reflection. I always say to children, you have the power. No one else has it but you.
Absolutely.
So when your child says, I'm bored, many times parents feel that they have a responsibility to keep their child engaged.
Mhm.
It's up to your child to find engagement. It's up to your child to figure all of that out. And there's skills that we can teach children, but we have to start those skills when they're very young, when they're 1, when they're 2, when they're 3, and doing it in a kind, respectful way. Also, how you treat each other in the house is how your child is going to be perceiving how to treat others. So if you find that you're in a family of yellers, if you like your husband and you might yell a lot, and it doesn't mean you don't love each other, that's just the way you communicate. Get a tape recorder, tape it and see what's happening in your house, because that's how your child is learning how to react to things. They'll start to raise their voice. And some children don't come in homes like that. They don't come from those homes. They find that aggressive. So it's really, that's the way it works.
I agree with her. I think all ages are indicated depending on the type of interaction that they've been modeled in the home. And what we know right now is that it's around 20% of our young school populations that are being engaged in a bullying interaction, whether they are identified as the child who is bullying or the child who is receiving the bullying.
And what can a parent do if they suspect that their child is being bullied?
I think that the first thing, there's lots of do's and don'ts, I think, in this answer. But if you do suspect that your child is being bullied, there's lots of signs, by the way: school refusal, maybe unexplained marks or injuries, or lower self-esteem than usual, without like a known cause. So when you start to kind of see these red flags, you want to keep an open mind when you approach them, I think, with the questioning. A lot of times if you assume things, such as also kind of questioning what they may have done to precipitate aggression, it sends the wrong message to the child that it's almost like a victim blaming. So making sure that you're keeping an open mind and asking open-ended questions rather than assuming that, well, you must have done something. It's important to make sure that also when you're kind of inquiring on what's going on, that you give them the skills to be able to address and communicate effectively, with the assertiveness, with healthy boundary setting, and being able to brainstorm on their own and come up with solutions on their own before you jump in and say, let's fix this. Because again, I think that is the instinct.
Absolutely.
And I don't blame it. I think that it's the skill building piece that's the most important too.
So what should the parent not do?
I don't think you should jump to conclusions immediately,
Right.
because you really have to, again, as we started this conversation, there's a difference between bullying, which is pervasive and is happening all the time, and your child is fearful. There's a big difference between having a disagreement with a friend or with children who you may be a little less friendly with, which is usually temporary, and actually being bullied. Because once you go into a school district and you state that your child is being bullied, that triggers a whole bunch of things that have to take place legally. Every single school district in the United States has a bullying/harassment policy. It is very, very complete, and it tells parents exactly what they're going to do if you state that. You'll also have to fill out a form about the bullying, who is doing the bullying. So once you bring up bullying, it does trigger a whole chain of events. So be very cautious before you do that, and make sure it is in fact bullying rather than just disagreements a bunch of kids, because there's a big difference.
Yeah, and I think also like capitalizing on the resources that are set in the school as a means of support for the child is essential. There's a reason why there's a school counselor. And so I think too, having those safe spaces to go and be able to process that when mom and dad aren't around, to be able to address those needs in the moment is really important. I'm a really big proponent of a multidisciplinary collaborative approach. So if there is conflict in the school system, I think it does warrant that if a counselor is open and available, or a safe person such as a teacher or administrator that has a nice bond or connection with the child, that's a huge protective factor. And I think that it warrants creating a plan, right? So creating a safety plan. If I feel unsafe, this is number one, this is what I can do. I can go to this person, or I can do this or say this. And again, it's that empowerment of the child.
Absolutely.
you know.
But the important thing is this: if in fact your child is being bullied, you have a right and a responsibility to your child to make sure that the proper people know that it's happening
Mhm.
and that they begin the procedures that they know that they have to follow to stop it. Every single child has a right to a free and public education
To feel safe.
and to feel safe, whether it's in camp or whether it's in school or on the playground, in a
So
neighborhood
what I'm
playground.
hearing is that the parent should not call or text the other child's parent or go to the parent's
Absolutely.
house, right, the other child's house and confront the parent.
I think that that's probably one of the later interventions that they could make with more supports, probably through a school setting and maybe administrators facilitating that conversation, because often it becomes ugly. If, let's say, the receiving party of the parents of the alleged bully becomes defensive, aggressive back, or it becomes counterproductive in conversation, and then creates probably more animosity between the peers. And so I think that shouldn't be the first line. Again, I think the first line is empowering that kid to be able to see if they can solve it with some tools and safety and supports. If that doesn't work, then you go to administration. And if that doesn't work, then you have other resources through legal means as well.
Okay, so that brings me to the next question. When should the authorities be notified? What type of situations would worry?
When you feel your
police
child's
involvement?
at risk, if it escalates to the point that you feel that your child is at risk. And I will tell you that the school district will have no problem if they feel that you need to bring in the authorities. They're going to tell you, we think we need to bring the authorities in. This has escalated.
Because
Because
a threat of safety, right?
Absolutely.
Typically, police officers that I've worked with in the past have filed reports if there's a direct threat of harming self or others. And they take also other mediums of being able to intervene outside of just like arresting a kid. Sometimes they'll question, is this child also okay? Are they feeling safe? Why are they aggressing against other children?
Sure.
So it seems like, depending also on the police officer or legal authority you get, who may be trained or not.
Remember,
Yeah.
once you say to a teacher, you tell your teacher, you confide in your teacher that you are being bullied every single day and you're afraid to come to school.
Mm-hmm.
And it's getting more and more difficult for you to come to school. And you may not want to tell your parents for whatever
Right.
reason, so you're telling a teacher who you respect and feel comfortable with. There will immediately be an investigation. There are procedures in place to make sure that your child is safe. And that will happen immediately.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And which school-based anti-bullying programs work best? There are several approaches in your experience. What have you seen work?
And unfortunately, there's a lot of research out there because people have kind of taken upon themselves to create their own curriculums, own approaches, assemblies. And they found in a study of studies, so meta-analyses, that most anti-bullying programs out there are actually extremely ineffective and maybe have more of like a 20% impact, which is unfortunate. So a lot of more research really needs to be placed to find what are the factors that are more productive in helping. What they have found, and this is also out of UCLA, one of the most effective programs out there is through UCLA, but they had peers give feedback on what they thought about these current bullying programs. And a lot of them felt disconnected to the speaker. And so they tuned the speaker out because they would gather these huge assemblies. And then they would have the speaker say, don't bully, bullying is bad, don't be a bully. And so the children, after a while, with that repetitive message of kind of, it's almost like a punitive message, would tune out the speaker. And so what they're finding more and more is that positive reinforcement quality is more motivating to the brain. And so it's more motivating to the children to listen to. They're more receptive. And also they said that it's not so much the education that's being brought to the schools with like a speaker, but rather the day-to-day policies that the teachers and administration follow and how they end up holding peers accountable from day to day versus this huge intervention or curriculum. And that's kind of what some factors I've found to be effective. And I think it also comes down to connection of the person that's trying to intervene with the program. If children don't feel bonded to the person that's trying to teach them these skills, and you have this stranger kind of coming in, it's not as effective as if you're training the staff and people with those pre-existing connections to give those interventions to those children. So connection is powerful, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
I do think there's a place for those assemblies. I do think
Absolutely.
because they jumpstart.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you need a little jump start to get the message out, just to give a little excitement to
Mhm.
people. So I think there's a place.
Awareness too.
No question.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, what's happening in the schools, and I think people out there who are watching this are going to be nodding their head in agreement. We are so focused on academics, we are so focused on testing today, that we spend less and less time on building character, on building values, on building what's important most in reality to make it in life as an
Mhm.
adult.
Mm-hmm.
Because
A lot of pressure.
there's a lot of
There's a
pressure
lot of
on those
pressure for
scores.
kids.
There's a lot, so that we end up spending less and less time on something as simple as being kind to one
Mhm.
another and not accepting children who aren't kind and bringing children to task who don't treat others as nicely as they should. So we need to do more and more of that because it's needed very, very badly. And talking about self-reflection. What kind of a person do you want to be?
Mm-hmm.
Who are you?
Mhm.
We have to spend more time on that.
On the values.
On the
And
values.
in the family, I think.
No question about it. What are your
Family
family
dynamics.
values?
Because I do
Definitely.
think it starts at home, and I think that if I'm
Definitely.
modeling as a family member or a parent certain aggressive dynamics in my home, I'm going to model how to respond to the world to my child. My child's going to repeat those patterns in their own peer groups, and those things tend to ripple effect throughout a
Absolutely.
systemic context.
No question. It's all about expectations.
Mhm.
What do we expect? All anybody wants to know is, what do you want?
Right.
How can I be successful? And these are our expectations at home. This is how we expect you to treat each other, and this is how you're going to be treated. And as a teacher, this is how this classroom is going to run.
Mhm.
And we're going to treat each other with respect.
Mhm.
We're going to treat each other with kindness. We are going to include others. We are going to respect others' space and not touch other people, because everybody has their little space.
There's clear-cut expectations.
It's a modeling.
It's absolutely, that's where it begins. Bullying accelerates as children get older because they haven't learned the skills not to be a bully when they were 2, 3, 4.
Builds upon itself.
That's where it starts.
So then that leads us to one of our questions that came in. What are some of the signs that your child is being bullied at school? From those younger years moving up.
School refusal is a huge one that we see in the research. If a child all of a sudden, like I had said earlier, starts to say, I don't want to go to school, Mom and Dad. I don't want to be able to
I have a
go see.
headache, I have a stomach
Yeah,
ache.
they have psychosomatic symptoms. They start manifesting maybe physical excuses for not wanting to go. Anxiety, nervousness, lower self-esteem than usual. All sorts of sudden changes in mood or behavior can be an indicator. And I also suggest too that to really know, I think, and I'm biased, but I do think going to a mental health professional if you do see some of these mental health issues arise is important so that you can rule out other mitigating factors as well. But I do think that those are one of the biggest hallmark signs.
Okay.
And what is the bystander's role in a bullying situation? So I'm on the playground and I'm
Yeah.
seeing a child being bullied. What do the kids around? What should they do?
Well, I feel very strongly
Yeah.
about that issue
Yeah.
because I believe that we have to empower everyone to take control of the situation. And number one, and I've said it before and I cannot stress this enough, if you are feeling uncomfortable in any situation, it doesn't have to reach bullying, walk away.
Mm-hmm.
You do not have to stay there and accept feeling badly about yourself. It's unnecessary. I've seen adults be bullied and stand there and accept it. No one should have to do that. You walk away and you find a safe place. You may join another group of children who you know and you feel comfortable with, or you may simply just get out of that particular situation and go by yourself and read a book, get a drink of water, just get out of the situation. The children we have to teach children that if they see something happen, they should never get into a situation where they themselves might be in danger.
So these are the bystanders, the kids who are
Absolutely.
watching the event.
Bystanders
Yeah.
should never ever put themselves in a situation where they could put themselves in jeopardy. But someone should get an adult if it has escalated to the point where they're feeling threatened themselves. Nobody wants to jump in and get involved. They're afraid that they're going to be bullied. A lot of kids don't want to tell their parents because they're afraid that their parents are going to go to school and they're afraid that the bullying will intensify because they tattled. There are so it's not easy. There are no easy answers.
I think ideally too, creating a group norm where bystanders can be a safe place or a peer that's safe to them is very powerful. So that's I think in the ideal world that you would feel that you could go to a safe peer to be able to feel protected or at least a resource to get help in situations where you might not be thinking clearly because you're being confronted. But we know that in the research there's a bystander effect, meaning that a lot of people in a group, whenever there is some kind of crisis, tend to have like that frozen deer in the headlights reaction because they assume, and this is kind of a false assumption that people carry in groups, that somebody else is already doing something about it. And so they all kind of all sit around and wait for someone to act. But sometimes it takes that one peer to say, you know what, Johnny, come with me, let's go find Mrs. Smith. You don't have to listen to that. And I think that that's powerful because I think community and being kind in numbers can be a really great solution.
That's what I always tell my daughter. That's a test of strength of character.
Absolutely.
And if you can, help a friend by calling an adult.
Right.
And
Not necessarily aggressing back, but being able to be that safe space and creating a buddy system, I think is really important too.
But you have to feel secure enough within yourself
Absolutely.
to be able to go over to that child who's being bullied and say, come on, Johnny, come with me.
Exactly.
So you have to know yourself. If you are a leader, and there are children who are leaders, they're natural leaders, you can go over and say to the person who's doing the bullying, okay, enough. I've seen that happen time and time again. I've seen it happen successfully. Or take that child out of harm's, and I'll put harm in quotation marks, harm's way.
Wonderful. Thank you. So what are the long-term mental health consequences for both the bully and the victim?
Children that are being bullied tend to have an increased risk of adjustment disorders and adjustment issues. They're at increased risk for developing suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety, and for the bully itself, typically I think there's lots of mitigating factors that would create a trajectory for them. But if there is no accountability and early intervention, I think they could develop patterns of antisocial behavior, delinquent behavior. Yeah, so antisocial behavior is like sociopathic behavior, meaning that they violate the rights of others, they have no regard for others. And if, again, I'm not saying that someone that has bullied becomes a sociopath, but if not intervened, I think that there is a trajectory, more of a vulnerability to kind of developing those qualities, if not properly supported and intervened with. I also think that the bully, I always have the premise that hurt people hurt. And so there's no, solid research saying that a bully necessarily has a mental health disorder. But I do think that bullying is almost a form of asserting control over somebody else. And if I feel in my life that things are out of control or I don't have a lot of predictability, it may feel good to go and perpetrate against another child in aggressive ways to feel better about myself. And I think that we need to look not just at the victims, but also the children that are perpetrating just as much, because I think they equally deserve the support and care.
That is such a great point. And I'd like to ask parents, when a principal or a vice principal or a teacher calls you in or a camp counselor calls you in and says to you, your child is behaving in an aggressive manner. Your child is bullying others. Your initial reaction is always to defend your child. You love your child. You don't accept it. I don't know. He doesn't behave like that at home. You're going to want to come up with some excuses. I'd like you to take a step back and take a deep breath and say, I need to investigate this. And when you're investigating it, it has to be done in such a way that you're investigating it to help your child, not to reprimand your child, not to yell at your child, but you want to find out what's happening with your child that he or she feels that they have to be aggressive.
Absolutely.
It is up to you as the parent to do something about that. And too many parents tend to not want to believe that their child is capable of doing it, and so they ignore it and don't do anything about it. You really need to step in a positive way and talk to your child about what your expectations are and how you're going to help them reach those expectations, because that's your job, to help them be successful so that they can learn to control themselves.
And I think too, it's looking at the function behind the behaviors. Children are much more than just the facade of behaviors. There's feeling behind the behavior. There's thought patterns behind behaviors. There's vulnerability behind these behaviors. So children, when we look at them, I hate just labeling a child as the bully, because that just insinuates too that, well, this is my role. I'm just a bully.
That's who I am.
And so I'll never change this role. And so being able to first look at the whole child first, who happens to sometimes struggle with these bullying-like behaviors or is being bullied, because we want to look at that whole child first and all of their attributes, strengths, and weaknesses, and be able to capitalize, I think, on those things first.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So how can the victim heal? We'll start with the victim and then we'll go on to how the bully can heal.
So I'm biased. And I do think, I'll talk to you about protective factors. What we know helps a child heal, whether they're in mental health services or not, is a very supportive connection in their life, in a safe environment that they can go home to, that their needs are being met. We want to look at all those basic things first as predispositions and strengths to help them on the road of healing. If my needs aren't being met, I'm not going to be able to think about my mental health needs. So it's important to first look at that first. I think then if those things aren't enough and you still feel like there's unresolved mental health issues and symptoms that are arising, seek that professional help and don't be scared to reach out. We're all out here. We're ready to serve. And I think that it's really important to know that there's no shame in seeking help as a parent or a child. So
we had a question come in specifically about children with Medicaid and what services would be available to those children if they were either the bully or the victim of bullying. Do you know of any services?
Absolutely. Well, depending on what you're looking for service-wise, if you're looking for mental health services, I actually do take Medicaid. I take certain select insurance plans from Medicaid Sunshine and WellCare, Stay Well. But there are huge clinics out in our community that serve our populations well. Sequel Youth and Family Services, Tykes and Teens. You have New Horizons has an outpatient department, and there are providers as well that do panel with Medicaid. So if you're looking for the mental health piece, I can tell you a little bit more about that. The other thing for resources, Parenting Academy out in our community run by Kimberly Eardley does a lot of services for families and parents resource-wise. And so it's just important to know what's out there. You are supported. There is help out there. And it's important to know that.
And you can always look on your insurance card and there will be a number for mental health services.
Absolutely.
You can always start there.
Call the services 1-800 number on the back of your card as well for providers.
And the next question, what are some of the long-term consequences from if you were bullied as a child and your mental health needs were not met? What does the adult picture look like?
I think that varies. I don't think it's a very black and white answer, to be frank with you, because there are so many factors that contribute to adjustment later on in life. What if you were severely bullied, repetitively bullied throughout your lifespan, you're looking at developing anything from suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, depending on the nature of how you internalize the bullying. Difficulties also engaging in connection in your relationships because of the dynamic of not maybe trusting somebody else, maybe social isolation and lack of assertiveness. So there are a myriad of things I think children can then develop longer term. And it really depends on the genetic vulnerability of that child and also the environmental factors that trigger that genetic vulnerability. If a child's bullied in childhood, but then let's say develops those supports outside of school, is able to receive services, has that connection, they're probably able to have a better percentage of a likelihood of being well adjusted. If you don't have those things, then your odds are definitely not in your favor.
So you had mentioned,
Yeah, no,
the protective factors.
Yes.
Can you touch on specific protective factors and the concept of resilience?
So connection is a huge thread in protective factors. Like I said, it takes one solid, consistent, safe support to be able to increase your likelihood of having better adjustment. Whether that be that teacher or counselor in the school or that parent that's very safe and nurturing and consistent with you. Obviously the family dynamic. Do you have healthy, authoritative parents that provide structure and nurturance all in one? That your basic needs are being met. Do you live in a low socioeconomic status community where your needs are not as easily accessible and met as, say, a child in middle to higher income neighborhoods? So those things can all be, ingredients in the formula of protective factors. And you can't necessarily say one will determine long-term health, but it's more of a formula, if that makes sense.
yeah, I think it's very important if you see a change in your child and your child's behavior, it may not be bullying. It could be any number of factors. I think you need to observe it for a while, and then if your child isn't opening up to you and you're seeing that it is progressing, and you're not happy with what you're seeing, it is foolhardy to think it's going to go away by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, it's not going to go away by itself.
Mm-hmm.
It is always better to seek professional help when your child is younger than having it become a real issue and now it's going to be more difficult when now your child's 11, 12 years old. So if you see something and you're not even sure what it's all about, and your child isn't forthcoming with you, which can happen,
Mm-hmm.
don't ever hesitate to seek professional help.
Absolutely.
I always told that to parents. It's the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. And you can nip these things in the bud and be so happy, especially if your child tends to be anxious. There are a lot of anxious children. There are so many different variables today that children have that they have to cope with. And if you find that your child is becoming more and more anxious, get some help. Find out. There are so many things that your child can learn.
Absolutely.
And sometimes they don't want to listen to you as a parent.
So that's
They
why
want to
I say,
listen to
come to
somebody
your
else.
pediatrician.
Right, come to your
A third
pediatrician.
party,
Come to
and
some-
at least start there. And I'm happy to send
Always get a
send you to
physical.
resources.
Certainly.
And,
Well,
yeah.
First thing is a physical. Get a
Yeah.
physical. See, maybe a
Absolutely.
child really doesn't feel good. They're saying I have a stomach ache. Maybe they really do have a stomach ache.
Well, and I think too that
Exactly.
being able to know that help is out there, because children do have a fear of retaliation
Oh, big
and a
time.
fear of consequences. I'm the snitch. That's kind of like that term that's being used. I'm at risk of being looked at poorly socially. My social status in school will suffer if I tattle. And so it's important, I think, to know that safe buddy systems and peers are very important and powerful. We know in the research children are a lot more likely to disclose to their best friend what's going on than maybe to talk to their teacher or their counselor or even a parent, siblings. So peers are powerful, and that's because of that group norm. So being able to be kind of involved in also getting to know your child's peers, I think is also very important.
And I think also having multiple groups of friends, like you
Yes.
may have your soccer friends, you have your yearbook friends,
Yeah.
you have your swimming
Those
friends.
safe spaces.
Right, so multiple
Absolutely.
groups of things aren't working out in one group, you still have many other groups. And,
The
a
power in
sense of
numbers.
community.
You need to find your niche.
Yeah.
Really, there is always
That's what
a group.
everybody's looking for.
Everybody has to find their niche.
Absolutely.
And they will in their own time.
Absolutely.
They will in their own time. My whole career, I saw it every day.
Yeah.
So this question came in, and you touched on it a little bit about what if it's actually the adult in the situation who is the bully, like the teacher or a staff member who is the bully. How can that be identified? And I imagine the child would be fearful. So how can that child be encouraged to speak up? Or
I don't think the child should speak to the teacher, him or herself. It depends on the grade. I don't think a third grader, as an example, should. Certainly a high school, even a middle school child can tell a teacher in private, one-on-one, you know, when you said that to me, I want you to know how it made me feel. You know, it made me feel so-and-so. I think you're a great teacher, but I feel I have to tell you that. I don't have a problem with that at all. But if you're young, I think you need to tell your parent. And then I think that if it continues, I think that the parent needs to come into school. I think the parent needs to make an appointment with the vice principal, with the teacher. I think you should always go to the teacher first and say, this is what I'm hearing. I'd like to talk to you about it. I don't think you should come on like gangbusters. We're all here for the same child. Everybody's here for your child. So let's come in and let's talk about the situation and let's see if we can rectify it.
Absolutely.
If you find it didn't work, you go to the vice principal. You go to the principal.
You work your way.
You work your way up. But you should always go to the source first.
I once had a case where a child actually identified that their teacher was being extremely condescending, would target that child often in the school setting, would insult the child, call them nerd, call them weird. Very unfortunate behavior that adults, yes, do assume. Believe it or not, professional adults can be bullies themselves. And that child actually came up with writing that teacher a letter.
Great idea.
And I was so impressed at the skill of being able to initiate that idea on their own and be able to eloquently and respectfully be able to say how they felt. And once that letter was given with the parent obviously present as a support or another counselor that was also aware of the situation, it actually turned out to be an amazing conversation between the student and the teacher and the parents, and an apology transpired. And then they almost were unaware of how they were approaching that child. So I think it's very powerful too to, like I said, empower that kid. If there's too much fear, obviously involve the rest of the resources, but I thought that was a really powerful moment for that child.
And it helped the teacher too,
Yeah.
which is great.
To have some awareness of their own behaviors. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
you also mentioned one other thing, the link between bullying and suicide. Can you touch on that? Is this a strong link, a direct correlation?
I want to caution because a lot of people believe that bullying is a direct causal effect to suicide, and that is actually far from the truth. And a lot of what the CDC also cautions is that if we kind of put two and two together and say bullying equals suicide, then there's a copycat effect that can stem from that as well. So it's very important to know that bullying doesn't necessarily cause suicide. What bullying does is it actually increases the risk of suicidal thought by 2.2 times more likely to occur. And will, I think from what I remember, 2.6 times more likely to attempt suicide if you're repetitively bullied. But children, because of their complex nature and all of the different domains that they have, may already have a predisposed genetic vulnerability for depression, suicidality, have other risk factors along with the bullying. So obviously bullying is a terribly negative risk factor, but it doesn't necessarily cause direct suicidality in a child. So I think it's important to make sure that we differentiate that.
So just if we could sort of sum up, how can we teach our children to be resilient in all of this? I just read a wonderful article on resilience this morning.
I think we can teach children to be positive, which will lead to resilience. And I have activities in my resource guide on being positive and learning to, not every day is going to be a great day. It would be wonderful if it could be, but that's not the way life is. But we can learn to react to things in a much more positive way. What I always talk to children, and I've said this term before, and I feel very strongly about teaching it, self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
Children should wake up every day.
Mm-hmm.
They should look at themselves in the mirror and say, what kind of a day do I want to have today? I want to have a good day today. What can I do to make that happen? And then you try every day to make it happen. And then at the end of the day, you should be able to look at yourself in the mirror as you're brushing your teeth to go to bed and say, what kind of a day did I have?
Mm-hmm.
What did I do that worked really well today?
Mm-hmm.
What could I have changed to make it work even better?
Mhm.
That's a skill. It's a skill we can teach children. I do self-reflection every single day. I'm retired now as a superintendent of schools. But when I taught school and when I was an administrator, I did that every single day of my life. I think it works.
Accountability too.
Absolutely. You are responsible.
Mhm.
And you can create that within yourself. You have the ability to do that. But we have to try to teach children not to perceive things as negative. When you lose a softball game, you feel badly.
Mhm.
You want to win. And I get that. But how was the game? How did you play? Did you have fun with your friends? When a child comes home from a game, instead of saying, did you win? Say, did you have fun? There's a difference. Think about that.
I think it's also very
Great
powerful.
tool.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
I think it's very powerful too that this message is directly for the parents. If you model resiliency to your children, you are the window and the blueprint of how to react to the world. Now, children have their own traits and their own predisposed temperaments and personalities, but as a parent, they're always watching you. And so if you're internalizing things throughout the day that may go wrong as devastating, as completely impairing, you're teaching that child that when things go wrong, we are impaired and paralyzed by those things. I think it's also important to validate negative things, be able to reflect.
Yes.
Things can stink sometimes.
Yeah.
And that what am I going to do about it to make this better or to navigate through the negativity and the feelings that are coming up? So I think parents you guys are so powerful, more powerful than you think when it comes to building those tools for your kids.
And you say, I know you feel badly about
Yeah.
this. Let's see how we can change it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think we can do
Mm-hmm.
to make this better?
Mm-hmm.
Child doesn't do well on a
Mhm.
test. Instead of reprimanding your child, let's talk about it.
Problem solve.
Absolutely. What
And
could you
then,
have
and then
done?
letting them fail too, because I have a lot of parents that are like, we gotta fix it. Okay, what are we gonna do? Okay, let me just make a call, and that child then doesn't do the skill building. You know what I mean? So it's so important too to let them have some natural consequences and fail, so they can navigate through those difficult moments.
Accountability.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And good sportsmanship.
Yeah.
Learning good sportsmanship.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fair. I do a monthly blog, and I don't know how many golfers are out there, but last month Phil Mickelson took a putt that wasn't going where he wanted it to go, and he ran after it and he pushed it, which was not good sportsmanship. And I think we can help children learn to be good sports
Absolutely.
and learn to shake hands afterwards. You
Lots of
can't
life
always win.
lessons in there.
Yeah, you can't always win. Can't always win.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Any closing thoughts?
Wow. Difficult.
Yeah.
Difficult.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing that you can do as parents and educators is listen when children are speaking to you.
Mhm.
I know that you have busy lives and things are very hectic, but if your child is trying to say something to you, stop what you're doing and listen. That would be my final advice.
I think for me, it comes down to being kind to yourself, modeling kindness to yourself, kindness to the people around you, so that your children learn how to be kind to others as well. And learning self-worth and that you matter, that you're seen, that you're heard, that you do have worth and the ability to seek out help if needed. And that those things are really crucial to know, because a lot of times people feel so alone in the bullying interactions. So modeling kindness and knowing that you have the ability to get help is super important. So
Thank you.
Thank
This
you.
is wonderful. Thank you for all of this
Thank you.
information.
Thanks for having
Thank you.
us.
I've
It's
learned so
great.
much. So I
So
really
have I.
appreciate that.
And
Thank
I
you.
hope you all have learned as well. If you have any additional questions, feel free to send them over and we will answer them. Again, I'm Dr. Monique Mondesi at Optimal Care Pediatrics. You can reach me at 772-301-0123. And we are going to post Lois's contact information as well as Dr. Laura's contact information. All the best. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Hey guys.
Thank you.